pronounce your name correctly for me.
Yes, absolutely. My name is Marianne Hultman. Hultman is the English pronunciation. In Swedish, it's Marianne Hultman.
So are you Swedish?
I'm actually Swedish-Israeli.
Swedish-Israeli. Now that's a fascinating combination.
It happens.
Every combination happens, but so which parent is Israeli?
My mother. But she grew up in Alexandria.
That's Egypt.
That's in Egypt, yeah. So I mean, a lot of things. People moved around all over the Middle East up until basically the Ottoman Empire fell, and colonialism arrived to the Middle East pretty late, and the French and the English and I think the Germans were also poking around there, and that made things a little bit more complicated. But before that, families would have like relatives all over. So you could live in Alexandria and go to Khartoum in the summers, or up to the mountains in Lebanon in the winter, or the other way around, depending on if you wanted it to be warm or cold. And after 1947 or 48, it became, when the State of Israel was founded, it all became very complicated.
Yes, and we're not here to talk about that because I have no position on that. I stay neutral. Yeah. So anyways, moving forward. So you are, what exactly is your current position? Because you are at the...
I'm the director of North Norwegian Art Center, and...
You translated that for me. That's not the actual name.
Isn't it?
I thought it has like a Norwegian name.
Yeah, Nordnorsk Kunstnersenter.
There you go. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And Nordnorsk Kunstnersenter, we have a gallery in the largest city in Lofoten, Svolvær, where we have an exhibition program and also a sort of museum shop where we sell art and design by artists who are live and work in Lofoten, but also in the whole northern part of Norway. And apart from that, we also have programs that we run. We're in contact with artists and art centers all over northern Norway.
I'll say Norway as a whole country seems to have a very strong, interconnected set of, like, I'm not sure, centers, associations. I'm not sure exactly what the right word is, but like you all seem to work together. I'm not going to say necessarily well because I haven't really interacted personally, but that you seem to actually communicate well with each other, and you seem to work on projects together and things like this. Because coming from the United States, very little, like, you know, like something in Virginia doesn't work with something in the next state. Like they just don't talk to each other. So like you all seem to actually work together in a very positive way.
Well, I mean, it's really good when it is positive, but I think also that it has a lot to do with Scandinavia as a social democratic and the social democratic concept. And also how cultural politics developed in Scandinavia during the 60s, and which included that artists also organized themselves in artist unions.
I know, I love the idea of artist unions. Ugh.
And they did a lot of very important work, especially maybe in the 70s. And in Norway, the artists' unions or associations are still very strong political entities. So, for instance, in Norway, you have the National Artists Association, and they also have more regional or and regional artist associations. And because the northern parts of the countries are huge, I think it's difficult to even imagine how large these areas are. It also, sometimes it's good, sometimes maybe not so good, but it also divides the artists. So you talk a lot about northern Norway or the northern parts of Norway, but we're still in Norway. We don't talk so much about southern Norway, the southern parts of Norway, which is interesting. And also because I'm Swedish, as an outsider, I can sort of see these things. I don't necessarily see them in Sweden, but it's easier for me to spot them here. And it's interesting to think about it. Why is it like that? Is it good? Should we challenge it?
I had no idea there was a northern versus southern Norway. Like, to me, it's just, from an outsider's perspective, it's just Norway. But it seems like regionally there is this very strong divide between the north and the south, which is, for me as an American, so the north and the south is a strong divide that we have there along racial and racial tolerance lines. I hope that's not what it is here.
Here, I think it has a lot to do with natural resources, basically, and how our relationship to the landscape changed with modernity, and it's a parallel history with the idea of the nation state and democracy
and oil
and industrialism.
Yeah.
And
oil.
Yeah, but also before oil, you had the fish industry up here is very important, and for a long time it wasn't necessarily the people who it wasn't the fishermen who became rich.
Still
it were
not.
the merchants, and they were living in the south.
Oh, okay.
And then you have also other natural resources here. I mean, oil only came in the 70s. So there is a very long history where so the south sort of harvests
the resources of the north.
resources of the north.
Okay.
And now we're going into a sort of new cycle where you think about the environment, and you have to think green around that whole thing. But it's basically the same story.
Put air quotes for the green, just to be clear. People can't see that you did air quotes. So I'm
sorry.
Sure to tell people
exactly.
that you did air quotes for green.
Yeah, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
It's an interesting change. I mean, we should, for all practical purposes, we should have been thinking that way all along. But of course, conglomerates and governments and powerful people decided not to think like that, but so on. So moving forward, though.
Exactly.
So the center that you work for also runs a international arts festival called LIAF, or Lofoten International Art Festival. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And it's a biennial. And it's happening this year.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Can I just say something?
Absolutely.
I'm going to stop you because I just wanted to clear that Nordnorsk Kunstnercenter is owned by the artists and designers, or arts and crafts artists in northern Norway.
Okay.
So that's part of the whole artist association history. And apart from the program that we do here in Lofoten, we also own and produce LIAF. And we also have the artist house in Lofoten, which is...
we are currently sitting in.
Exactly, which is a guest house for artists.
I personally, like, outside of this recording, I also want to know more about that. But but it's an artist residency program, basically.
Yeah, but you can't apply for a residency and then, because you have to pay.
Okay.
to
So
stay here.
So it is more
but
of a
it's
guest
very
house.
exactly. So I think a guest house is actually more accurate.
So it's basically like a place you can stay in a beautiful location that has a studio available for you.
That has 3 studios
3? I've seen
Yeah.
2. Where's the third?
in the cellar.
Okay, I saw
It's
it through
like
a window, but I
yeah,
didn't actually
yeah,
go down
yeah.
there. Okay.
And there's actually also a dark room.
I'm a photographer. Why has nobody showed me this?
I can show you afterwards.
Lovely. Okay. So, all right. Well, but I want to take a little bit of a step back, though. So, what did you do in a career that sort of led you to, or even practical purposes, like how'd you even get into the industry? So like childhood, education, but then like how did you come to this position?
So I was always fascinated by images, basically. And when I was a kid, we had a lot of photography books at home. And for me, it was a way to use or activate my imagination, was to just sit and look at all the photographs. And
What's the one book that you remember distinctly from childhood? Somebody asked me that recently, and I was just like, I have no idea.
I don't know, it was more like journalist photographies, black and white from the 30s, old Life magazines.
Yep. Yeah. I know it. Yeah.
More the National Geographic, actually.
Absolutely. My dad had an entire collection from like the 1960s all the way up. He had like an entire bookshelf of National Geographics.
Yeah. Fascinating. Fascinating. I just
Absolutely.
loved it. So we had a few books with photographies of that kind. And for me, it opened up the world. I mean, seeing an amazing portrait of Louis Armstrong, or I don't know why I'm thinking just about, but there are some really famous photographs, and it made me so curious about the world.
Yeah, we had Eve Arnold. That was one of the photographers my parents had on the coffee table, and we also had Marianne and Mark, who's also one of the ones I grew up with on my coffee table. So yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember the names of the photographers, but
It's my profession. I kind of have to remember
exactly.
the names.
Yeah. Well, I'm an art historian, so I should.
Wait, you're an art historian?
I'm an artist. Yeah, I studied art history.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't know that yet. So
Exactly.
learning new
so
things.
this fascination with images sort of led me to want to study art history, but to also understand the world that I was born into through culture and images. I was also fascinated by literature, theater, basically trying to describe the world around us.
Just for clarification, where was this? Where were you raised? Because I don't know if it was Sweden, if it was...
Yeah, so I grew up in outside of Tel Aviv for a few years, and then we moved to Sweden. And I grew up in Gothenburg, but also in Stockholm.
So moving on then.
Yeah. So then I thought that so the first thing I studied at university was actually the history of theater, which fascinated me. And I did that because I was contemplating of becoming an actor or actress.
I'm so bad with that differentiation. Somebody the other night, I was out at a restaurant and I said waiter, but it was a lady, and they got all offended.
Oh.
And I was like, I didn't mean it in any offensive way. Just waiter is a word. But anyways, go on. Actor, actress, yes.
Yeah, I had like this idea that it might be interesting. And after studying the history of theater, I realized that it's a very, very difficult job. And you have to use your body and your emotional life as an instrument in that way. For me, I could sense that it could become dangerous.
I could see that. I mean, not personally about you, but I mean, in general, I could see
Yeah,
it being
exactly.
dangerous. Yes.
To become so good at manipulating emotions in oneself and maybe using that on other people. I mean, I realized, and I also realized, okay, I don't want to become an actress if I'm not one of the best. And I wasn't sure that I could become one of the best, so I sort of dropped it. But I did apply for a theatre program twice. So I would know that at least I tried and that I wouldn't regret it, when I was around the age I am now and like, oh, I should have done that. Why didn't I pursue that?
We all try not to have regrets.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how you usually, I was thinking like that anyway when I was younger.
Oh yeah, no, I've done crazy shit in my life. Like I have very few regrets about things I didn't do. And many regrets about things I did do. But that's a whole different issue. So how did this then, so you graduated with art history. So and then what did you do after that sort of has then sort of led you down the path to here?
Well, so I wrote a thesis about Artemisia Gentileschi. She was an Italian painter who lived during the early Baroque era. She is exceptionally good painter. And after I finished that thesis, I became much more interested in contemporary art because it puzzled me. I remember trying to understand what Marcel Duchamp tried to do with the large glass, and I was like, I don't understand it. How was he thinking? What did he want to achieve? It was a complete mystery to me, and it fascinated me that I didn't understand it. So I wanted to study it more.
How do you feel about it now?
I still love it. I mean, it's still a complete enigma.
I was going to say, but is it still a mystery?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So it hasn't lost its mystery.
But the thing, what I understood much later is that was also the purpose.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I wrote another thesis about Robert Rauschenberg's Mud Muse, which is an amazing piece that he made between 1970, I think, and 1972, 73. And that's part of the collections of Moderna Museet in Stockholm. And the first time I saw it, I fell in love with it because I didn't understand what it was.
I feel the same way about Robert Rauschenberg's work. Like, I love looking at it, but I cannot figure out why he thought those disparate ideas fit together. Like I'm always like looking at him going like, okay, what was he thinking that he thought these images fit together? I can never figure it out. but I still enjoy looking at him.
He's amazing. He's one of my absolute favorite artists.
I came this close to meeting him. Literally, I walked down the hall. He was in my printmaking studio when I was at the Corcoran in Washington, D.C. And I just walked by and I was like, was that Robert Rauschenberg? And they were like, yeah, he's friends with Skip. And I was like, oh, Skip was our printmaking teacher. And they were just hanging out, running a little print edition. And I didn't go back and say hi. I should have. But anyways, that's my brush with fame there.
Yes, I wrote the thesis. And when I was writing it, I understood that Robert Rauschenberg, or I knew that before, he had a very strong connection to Sweden. He did a lot of, or several collaborations and exhibitions with Moderna Museet when he was still quite a young artist. And he also worked a lot with a Swedish engineer whose name was Billy Clover, and whom Billy Clover moved to New Jersey in the end of the 50s, I think it was. And he worked with laser for Bell in New Jersey. And he was fascinated by film, experimental film, but also with contemporary art. And he got to know all the New York artists, the young, like Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns and Andy Warhol and that whole bunch of very active artists during the 60s. And he started to help them out with solving technological problems for them because he was an engineer. So, for instance, he helped Andy Warhol to create silver clouds, just as an example. And they also did a huge, the first large-scale performance festival called 9 Evenings Theatre and Engineering. That was done in New York, I think, in 1962, I think it was.
I'm just going to believe you're right on all your dates. Go on.
And after that, Billy Kluver, Bob Rauschenberg, Bob Whitman, and Fred Waldauer, that was another engineer colleague at Bell, they founded Experiments in Art and Technology.
Just to be clear, when you're saying at Bell, you mean Bell Technologies?
Exactly.
Okay, great. I'm just making sure I'm understanding it correctly.
Exactly. But then it was Bell Telephone.
Right. Before they broke it up and all that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Back in the good old days.
Back when I was a kid, you still had to rent your telephone to have in your home from Bell.
Oh, wow.
So you didn't actually own a telephone. You rented the telephone.
But I wonder if it was that in Sweden too. But the thing is that, you always had the phone there. So we just, as kids, you didn't really understand that it was the telephone, the Royal Telephone Company that owned the phone.
That's right. Yeah, I didn't understand it. One day what happened was somebody in our house broke our phone, and my parents then sat down and explained to me and my brother, we don't own this phone, we were renting this phone. And we're like, what? It's a phone. who knew you rented these things at a time? But anyways,
yeah. So anyway, to make a very long story even longer, because I have read about Billy Kluver and I knew that he was probably around still. I looked up what I thought was his address and I sent him the thesis about Mudmuse because that was during the era where art and technology was sort of very much in the loop. And a couple of weeks later, the phone rang and he was on the other end. And then he asked if I wanted to come to New Jersey and work as an assistant for him and his wife, Julie Martin. And so I came, and then I traveled there and worked for them for 6 months.
Oh. I was waiting for you to say 10 years.
No, for 6 months. And then I also started to do research for my PhD because I had started pursuing my PhD. I still haven't finished.
As most people haven't, yes, it's fine.
I wanted to write about the early history of Moderna Museet. So while I was in New York, I also conducted interviews with many of the artists and filmmakers that had come to Stockholm during the 60s and 70s. And around that time was also in 1997, this was, Bob Rauschenberg had one of his largest retrospectives at the Guggenheim. So I met him several times, and I also did an interview with him.
Oh, I'm very envious, but all right.
And I met his turtle, Rocky, at Lafayette Street, and it was wonderful. He was an extraordinary person, and an extremely talented artist.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that was how I sort of fell into the contemporary art world in a way. And I wanted to stay on.
All right. Your story is fascinating, but now keep wondering, like, and how did you end up here?
Exactly. Well, it's not.
I don't mean that. I'm sorry. I said end up like it was like a downfall. I didn't mean that. But like, how did that lead to you to being here?
Yeah. So I realized after I came back from New York, I realized that I really wanted to work in a museum or with living artists. I didn't want to sit with other art historians and write about dead things. I wanted to be on the floor. And to start with, I thought that I needed to have a PhD to be able to enter the museum world. So,
you do. Why is that a question?
And after a while, so I started to work as a tour guide or a docent at museums. And that was my second university, really. So I learned so much by explaining artistic work by artists that I didn't even know that I was fascinated by. And it was a wonderful, wonderful school that I loved. I loved to talk to the public about art.
The public, when it comes to that kind of a situation, they come up with the most fascinating interpretations and or questions that like you had never even thought to ask about something. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially kids.
Oh, yeah.
But
they do that all the time about everything. But yes. But especially when they're looking at what they think is supposed to be something important.
Yeah.
That they don't understand.
Yeah. Exactly. So I did that for a while, and then there was a curatorial program that had just started at the university in Stockholm. And I thought that maybe that would be, instead of writing a PhD, maybe I can apply for that program and see if they accept me, and then I can do that instead of having a PhD and enter the art scene from a different angle. So I applied for it and I was accepted, and so I studied there for 2 years, and it was a very hands-on program, which was fantastic. And it was also then, it was placed in an art school at the art college in Stockholm, Konstfack. So we also got to know a lot of artists or art students. And after that, I applied for a curatorial position at a museum in Sweden, and I got it.
What time frame are we talking about at this
Now
point?
we're in 2000. So I finished the curatorial program in 2002.
Okay.
And then I started to work at Norrköping Konstmuseum, Norrköping Museum of Art. Norrköping is 1.5 hours south of Stockholm on the east coast of Sweden.
I'm an American. I have poor geography skills. Okay.
It's not far from Stockholm.
Got it. All right.
So I worked there for 5 years. It's a wonderful museum. They have amazing collections of mainly Swedish art, but also they have an amazing print collection that is international. And in 2005, I curated an exhibition with Norwegian contemporary artists, which made me go to Oslo a couple of times. And I also had a very good friend who lived there. And this job opportunity came up, and I applied for it, and I got it. So I moved to Oslo in 2007 and lived there for 15 years. I thought I would stay there for like max 4 or 5 years, and then I would go back to Sweden. But I stayed for 15 years, and it was great. Norway was, I felt at least, that there was much more institutional and artistic freedom in Norway, especially institutional freedom.
Versus
in Sweden.
Interesting.
So I was able to do things here that I most probably wouldn't be able to do in Sweden back then.
Help me out. I'm a foreigner to both of those countries. When you say like more or less freedoms to, I'm assuming you mean like exhibit particular subject matters or things like this. What's the difference between them?
At that point of time.
Okay, at that point we're talking 2008-ish, like starting around there.
There was a different kind of curiosity going on in Oslo. So the art scene was changing, expanding. There were more artists from abroad that came to Oslo, that studied at the art academy, than in Sweden.
So you're saying Sweden was staying as was before, whereas Oslo was progressing or evolving at that time.
Yeah. And Sweden also, of course, had that period, but that had happened like more in the 90s maybe, when it was sort of like expanding and blooming.
It is fascinating how that sort of changes over time. You know, it's almost like you could watch a wave go across the continent of like what cities and countries sort of go up and down. And I think it's because like I can think of places even in the United States where the like Chicago was really great at a certain time, and then Boston, and then New York, and then LA, and you know, so and it has like I went to school in San Francisco, so there was the San Francisco like Bay Area figurative or whatever kind of thing, different waves that go around. It's interesting how that progresses around the world.
Yeah. So for me, it was an advantage to work here. And also in Sweden, it was more difficult to... it was more difficult from the perspective of job opportunities. Because if you got a position as a curator in an institution, you don't move.
That's right.
And then you establish a family, you root, which makes it more difficult.
And then your children take over your job when you die.
Yeah, and in Norway it's more open.
Okay.
And I think it still is like that.
That's great. I mean, you know, I'm an outsider to all this, so it's sort of fascinating to hear even the more subtle nuances. Because like we would, as outsider, as an American, we would sort of look and think Scandinavia is mostly the same, like, you know, as a general whole. But it seems like there are these very specific differences. You know, I've been to Iceland now, and they have very specific different issues, basically, than Norway does. And it seems now Norway from Sweden, and I'm sure Finland,
Absolutely.
and so on down. Yeah. I would not have imagined it before coming here.
But still also we have a lot of common history, which I find the Nordic countries fascinating. And for me it's easiest to relate to Scandinavia, but also to Finland. I mean, our histories go in and out of each other and are so interconnected. And from a cultural perspective, or if you look at the arts, it's even more fascinating.
So leading you to then what? So you're new to this role, just so the listeners are clear to this.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been here for a month.
What? For 1 month. But I get the first question would be like, you know, as a sort of a suburban child of the city and stuff, like what would sort of encourage you or push you to choose to take a role from Oslo to a more rural setting such as Lofoten? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, Lofoten.
Okay, great. Lofoten. Okay. You know, why would that be something that, did you choose it? Was there some sort of life change that said, I need to slow my life down, or I want to be more involved in this particular role? Like, why did you make that transition?
Oh, I mean, after 15 years in Oslo, it was really time to do something else. But I've never been particularly scared of shifting positions from being in a larger city and moving out to the countryside. When I was working, for instance, in Sweden at the museum there in Norrköping, I lived in the countryside. But it was 2-hour drive to Stockholm, and up here in the north it's a little bit more complicated.
It's a 2-hour flight to Oslo.
Exactly, to Oslo, and that's just Oslo.
Yeah.
But now I'm also a little bit more experienced. I'm older, and it is really nice to be able to try out a more. I'm not sure if it's more quiet, but at least you're more connected to the changing seasons. For me, it's absolutely fascinating to be in such a rich part of the country. And for me, it's all new. So I'm like a little kid. I'm so excited about everything. I want to learn the whole history of Lofoten in 2 days.
It will take
and I want
longer.
to travel everywhere at the same time.
Yeah, well, I mean, people think that Loften, I'm so pronouncing that wrong, I know, but people think that that's like one cove or one fjord, but it's actually a whole district. It's like, basically it's a whole island chain, if I understand it correctly. And so it's not like, so a lot of people think it's just like the one picture they see, that one photo, sunset or with the aurora borealis or whatever, but like it's not that. It's an actual whole row of places with many towns, villages, and cities all sort of strung along this sort of, I guess, archipelago almost, really.
It is, yeah, exactly. And with very shifting landscapes also.
Stunning landscapes. Like, I mean, I'm sitting here, like, while we're talking, I'm sitting here staring out the window just because it's so beautiful outside. It's like, it's gorgeous.
It is. And also, I mean, I grew up in, also partly in Gothenburg. And one of the things that I've missed since I moved from there is the smell of the salty sea.
I like the smell of the salty sea. I'm not a huge fan of the smell of the cod.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I haven't been here when the cod is still fresh. That must be quite
Strong.
intense.
Yeah.
But when I came in the end of April, it was still quite smelly, but I don't mind it. But it's also, maybe I will mind it in a couple of years. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. But I find it absolutely fascinating. And that people have been doing that for 1,000 years.
Yeah, sorry, just for the listeners, though. Yeah, hold on.
Please explain.
Background, The cod fishing industry is one of the major exports of this region, and they do it in the same old way, the old tradition of literally just hanging cod on these more or less like wooden triangles.
Pyramid racks.
Yeah. And then just in the open air, all over town. And so therefore, when given the shift in the wind or whatever, like certain areas of town can smell very strong of cod. And I'm
drying
not even,
cod.
Yeah, and I'm not even here at the high season with the height of the smell, and it's quite strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it doesn't smell like rotten fish. It has a different smell.
No,
but
it smells like cod.
Distinct. It's distinct.
Oh, it's very distinct.
Yeah. But I mean, I had traveled in my profession to the northern parts of the countries.
So you've experienced that before.
Yeah, but I mean, I haven't lived here, but I've been here. I have colleagues
Your
here.
clothes haven't smelled like it yet.
And last year I also traveled for a week with a colleague in Finnmark, which is the most northern part of Norway. bordering to Finland and Russia and to the Barents Sea. And it's basically a sort of a flatland up there. And that's where you have all the reindeer. And it's sand. It's like a desert. It's sand, but you have all those birch trees. They're very tiny because it's above the tree line. And it's yeah. I didn't know that.
You're blowing my mind. Yeah, I had no idea. But okay.
And there you have a very rich Sami culture and tradition and way of life, and different challenges and conflicts, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I so fell in love with that. I mean, I was like, I need to know more. I want to have more.
For the listeners, again, little backstory on that. Sami is the sort of indigenous people of this, I should say this region, because it's not just Norway. So it's the northern
It's Russia,
Arctic
Finland,
region.
Sweden, and Norway.
Right. And Iceland.
I don't know if they have Sami people in Iceland. They do?
Yeah.
Here we go.
I was just there. Yeah. So yeah, it's the indigenous people. So like there's that difference in subtle cultural differences as well. So just, keeping everybody up with the vernacular that you're throwing out. That's all.
Yeah. And it's a whole different way of also, you think more east-west here than further down the country, where it's much more about the north and the south.
Right.
And shifting that perspective is also interesting to do. So what you can say is basically, to close up this very long answer, is that I'm a very curious person, and my curiosity drives me to new locations, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to move around.
It is, in many ways, it's a great thing. I've moved a lot in my lifetime, and so I get it. And it's fabulous in many ways. It's unfortunate in other ways, but you make your life choices and you just decide that that's what they are. So, yeah. But now let's get to LIAF, because that's really the underlying part of this entire thing. So LIAF is an international arts festival that is coordinated by your center and is run sort of in this region, because it doesn't even, it's a biennial, so it's once every 2 years. COVID negate, let's just cancel that. So every 2 years. and it's coming up, and so these set of podcast episodes is going to be a sort of a build up of what to expect and all this kind of stuff. So you came into this role a little bit sort of halfway through the preparations. So give us a little background on what the festival is as far as your knowledge goes.
Well, LIAF has been running for 30 years and is, I think still the largest international art festival in this part of the world.
This part being Scandinavia.
The northern hemisphere.
I was going to say, because Basel and Venice is obviously bigger.
Above the pole circle.
Okay. Well, that's
also say?
All the other artistic biennials above the polar circle.
Yeah.
I can't imagine there are many of those.
No.
Yeah, so you definitely have that truth.
Yeah,
yes.
And I think from the start, it started as a local art festival, but quite soon it developed into having an international perspective, but also having an alternative perspective, but not being rooted to one space. So it takes place all over Lofoten, which means that one biennial can be focused like this year, to Kabelvåg, which is a community not far away from where we're sitting. And another biennial could take part in a different community, a different part of Lofoten. And the biennial also uses industrial buildings that have been emptied out, or this time round we are going to have a large part of the exhibition in a school what used to be a school. So it's an old school building that is empty. So we go in
and will be demolished after this is all
will
done.
be demolished after, yeah.
Which is so exciting. I love doing art projects in buildings that will be demolished because you can do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
Exactly. But it also has to do, I think it's also linked to the fact that the industry changed in Lofoten, so many buildings weren't needed in the same way as before. So the biennial before this one, that was in 2019, was in the old building of the local newspaper.
Wait,
for instance.
They don't have a newspaper?
They have a local newspaper,
Okay,
but they didn't need that big building,
Okay.
because, you know, in the old days, you even printed the paper in the same building.
Sure.
So it was you needed so much more space. And today everything is digital and
they don't have full-time reporters anymore. And
exactly.
full-time
So the whole
photographers.
industry changed, the media industry, for instance. So then we could use that building.
Okay.
And so LIAF has taken place all over Lofoten.
All right. So, as an underlying sort of mission for LIAF, what is its sort of role, desire? Like, what is it trying to express or achieve?
Well, apart for the fact to be able to activate empty or abandoned spaces, is also to activate areas where people maybe don't tend to go otherwise, and also to invite artists to work in this very unique environment and learn more about Lofoten, but also engage in a global, I guess, or a global, I think you can say, dialogue with the rest of the art scene, by doing that with a local perspective. So instead of trying to be the Venice of the North,
Which could be a great tagline.
yeah, exactly. We are Lofoten, and we do it out of our own curiosities and necessities and needs, and in that way we become unique. In the same way that the Venice Biennale is unique.
Well, and some festivals, like we could take Venice Biennale as a good example. Generally, it's pre-prepared artwork that simply is exhibited there. Whereas here, there seems to also be the inclusion of artists actually coming here and producing works here.
So it's site specific.
Well, it's not even site specific, but even like experience specific. So like they come and reside here. They'll come to the guest house, or they will come a month or so early, and they will physically utilize the opportunities, resources, and whatever that are here to then create their works as well. So like that's a little different, because like in my mind, and maybe I'm just being naive in this, but like oftentimes festivals are, and I did air quotes for that, festivals, just to be clear, that festivals are like they curate the artworks that are pre-existing by an artist or an artist, and they then make something specific for it, but don't necessarily ever even go to the location or incorporate the location into it. So I feel like there's a slight uniqueness to this festival in that a number of the artists actually do come here and produce works of, by, about here. Am I wrong? I could be wrong.
Well, I think it is a little bit more complex than that, and it depends also
Wait, it's
on what.
more. I thought what I
it's
explained
more
was very
depending
complex.
on the venue of the Biennale, the purpose of the Biennale, and today, I mean, today there is a complete inflation. I mean, every city wants to have a Biennale, not really realizing what it entails and the responsibility of running such a show.
And you all have 30 years of experience.
Yeah, which is great. But what is also, I think, puts us in a unique position is that there are a lot of people who are very interested in coming here. And that's not necessarily the case everywhere. And we need to work with that in a responsible way. Because we have also seen what I find is very interesting to try to understand more about is how is the tourist industry changing Lofoten, and how do we need to think about tourism in the coming years.
Well, I mean, as I walked around town, I felt like pretty much the two industries were tourism and fishing, because I either saw fish hanging on a pyramid, or a boat tour, or a hiking tour, or some sort of adventure tourism kind of things. That seemed to be the two primary things I saw. Now, there may be things I didn't see, but those were the ones that I think seem to be the most prominent. So, like, is that a good thing or a bad thing, that sort of incorporation of tourism, in your opinion?
I don't know too much about it.
And with only a month's experience.
Exactly. But what I have understood is that the tourism has basically exploded for the last maybe 20 years here. And it's perfectly understandable.
It's stunning here.
It's stunning, and 20 years ago it was much more complicated and expensive to travel.
It's still not cheap.
It's not cheap, and it won't get cheaper in this world situation that we're in.
Until we get electric airplanes, then it'll get cheaper.
Well, I'm not sure.
They're probably going to be expensive too. Airlines will make those expensive as well, I know, but at least you'll feel better about it.
Electricity is not free. I mean, it also costs.
All right, solar-powered electric airplanes.
Exactly. Or if we can just teleport ourselves, that would be the...
I am a fan of Star Trek, so I will go with that. I look forward to that.
But it might be very chaotic for the first 30 years, because we would teleport ourselves all over the place.
It would be a very interesting life. You could just be like, I want to go to Paris for dinner, and you could just teleport there. That's craziness.
Yeah. But then still sleep in your own bed.
Or maybe you want to sleep in a bed in Japan. Maybe you could have houses you could literally live anywhere, and then teleport to work, and then teleport somewhere else for lunch. I mean, my God, but teleport, the dream.
Yeah. But I think that is anyway, I mean, it's something that I'm looking forward to understand the complexity of it better, and also how dependent we become on tourism, and is that good? I mean, what has it done? Again, if we go to Venice, what has it done with Venice?
Ruined it, in my humble opinion. But
you pay a price, and the question is, are we prepared to pay that price? Is it worth it, or can we think of it in a different way?
Is it really that much. Like, I mean, to me, the problem with Venice is over tourism. Like, so is it over tourism here, or is it just tourism?
I think it can very quickly become too much. And
yeah,
it's
I'm
already, you can see the traces that all of the people leave in nature, and you can see that in new paths, disturbed
trash,
nature, life. Yeah. And I think we need to be careful if it's possible. And then you have a lot of investors coming up here, and of course they want to
make money.
Yeah. And there is money to make. But on the other hand, you have this part of the world where you've had people travel here or end up here because of a storm. There have been people from all over the world in this area forever, basically. And that is also fascinating, because it's not as isolated as you might think.
I totally think it's isolated, but okay.
No, it's not. I think it's quite the opposite. And what is so interesting is what happens when people from different parts of the world meet. If it's up here.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I would gladly, in a moment, buy a cottage up here to come and holiday here, but I don't think I could live here.
No.
Coming here would be magnificent, but living here all year round, nothing personal to the people that do it, but I think I would go a little crazy.
Yeah, but I think that's good, because we can't have too many people living here all year round.
And you don't want me here anyways. It's fine. I understand. It's okay.
But I think what I'm trying to say is that the exchange, it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. There will always be exchange between people who end up in a place because of different reasons. They might have moved because of work. They might have fled because of war or political issues. People move around. And we have always done that, and we will continue to do that. But we just need to be more careful about how we do that, because now we're also becoming much more inclusive. We understand that it's not just about us, it's everything living. The animals need to be able to live their animal life.
Except the cod, which we want to fish and eat.
Yeah, but there is still quite a lot of, hopefully, cod around. And
I wonder, the first thing when I saw all of it was the fear of overfishing. I was sort of like, wow, that's a lot of fish.
Yeah, it is a lot of fish, definitely.
All right, any last thing you'd like to sort of touch on that we didn't maybe touch on specifically about LIAF?
Well, no, I think you will probably talk with my colleagues and artists that know so much more and can fill you in with much more accurate, interesting stories about LIAF. Because, as you said, I've been here for a month, and it's LIAF is opening on September 3rd. So it's
my birthday.
Wow. So it's literally around the corner.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. And enjoy your stay here in Lofoten.
Oh, it's been fabulous so far. But the weather's going to turn tomorrow.
But that's also fascinating.
Before you go, we would like to thank you for listening all the way to the end of the conversation. We would appreciate it if you would share this podcast with your friends, family, co-workers, studio mates, or anyone with an interest in the arts and creative industries. The building and strengthening of the arts and creative community both today and in the future is at the core of our mission for this podcast. They can listen and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are produced by 5014, and the music was created by Pete Bybee. The Wise Fool Art Podcast is supported in part by an EEA grant from Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway in an effort to work together for a green, competitive, and inclusive Europe. We would also like to thank our partners Hunt Kastner in Prague, Czech Republic, and Kunstsentrene i Norge in Norway. Links to EEA grants and our partner organizations are available in the show notes or on our website wisefoolpod.com.